Hello, good people, and welcome to Excel Virtually Global 2024. My name is Bernard Obeng Boateng. I'm lead trainer at Finest Skills Hub here in Accra, Ghana. I'm excited to join you for another session. Well, in this session is a very exciting one. We want to explore how to create a consolidated departmental budget in Excel. Of course, we create a dashboard out of it. But the key learning point here is that when we create budgets in the organization, we require inputs from different departments. Ideally, these people giving us the inputs from other departments will be in a shared folder with us, maybe on SharePoint or something like that. But herein lies the challenge. What if they are not in the same shared folder and they are supposed to access these various departmental sheets independently? Give us the data. How do we ensure that we have a folder that can consolidate this almost in real time and then update our budget dashboard? That is the task for this session. So I'm going to show you some insights you could adopt so that you can query a folder on your desktop while still maintaining a link to these sheets that you've shared to the various departments. Of course, we are going to learn how to use Power Query to transform the data. We'll learn how to use Power Pivot in Excel to create a data model, create DAX calculations and cube functions, and then we'll also learn how to create our final dashboard. So it's loaded. Hopefully you can come along step by step and then learn something good for your work at the office. So if you're ready, join me and let's get started. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to walk you through the architecture or the schema of how we are going to go about this. So we begin with a folder on our desktop. This folder contains the inputs Excel workbooks. This is what we are going to share to the various departments. So from this folder, we'll share to OneDrive. So this process can be done with OneDrive, personal or business. Now, once you do this, we will share the individual workbooks. You can choose to password this or you can leave it as it is. These workbooks will not require sign-in, so people from the departments can access it. Again, they don't need to be in the same shared folder with us. As long as the inputs is done online, on refresh, we can get the updated data. Then we can query the folder in our desktop. So when we query the folder on our desktop, it gets the latest data from the inputs workbooks in our OneDrive. Then we'll create our data model out of this. We'll do our DAX calculations, and then we'll create our visualizations and our dashboard. Now, the way the system works, even if there are changes in the OneDrive after, on refresh, it should pass through and then update your dashboard. So that is the schema or the architecture we are going to use. So we are going to start step by step, and then I'll walk you through the process. Okay, so we'll begin with a folder that has all the workbooks. So this is the folder, Department Budgets Live. This is the stats that will be shared with you if you want to practice along. So if you go into this folder, you realize that there are several workbooks, 7 of them for the different departments. Okay, so if I open one of them, this is how the layout is. So we have the department, the account code, and then the account name. Then the user is supposed to provide the inputs for the budget if it's a cost center, mostly expenses for the 12 months, right? So these numbers in blue will be filled in by the various departments. Of course, it can be longer than this, but the idea is that once you've consistently designed it to have the department, the account code, and the account name, all they need to do is provide the key numbers in this timeline. So this is what we are going to consolidate from all the 7 departments, and then we'll query using Power Query to consolidate, and then we'll build our final dashboard from there. So at the end of the day, we are going to collate and then get this final dashboard. So we'll be able to see the overall outlook for the entire company, where we compare our income, expense, net income, and also get the outlook for the year. Now, the values are also broken down by the accounts, okay, from January to December, giving us the net position. Of course, we can break this down by department. So for the cost centers, you realize that these are mostly outflows. And then for sales and marketing, which is a revenue or profit center, that one has a blend of the income, expense, and net profit. So that's how we are going to go about things, and then we'll end up with this final dashboard. Let's start work. Okay, so as indicated earlier, these files are in OneDrive and they have been synced. So normally this is the symbol to show you that it's been synced. We need to share the workbooks to the various departments. So what we're going to do is that we'll step out and then right click, and then on OneDrive, view this online, right? So I'll go to view online. Okay, so this is my online view. So over here, you notice that the files are private, but we need to share them for inputs from the various departments. So what we need to do is to make them available online. As indicated, you can put in passwords, or you can make it easy for them to even input the numbers without signing in, right? So we'll adopt the flexible approach where they don't need to sign in. They will just have to access the link and then make their inputs. So I'm going to start with the account. So when I select the account, I go to share, okay? And when this pops up, I'm going to leave it at anyone with a link can edit, okay? And I'm going to copy this link. So this is a shareable link that is going to be sent to the accounts department. You can repeat the process for the 7 departments. So once you've copied the link, you can send it to the department. So after copying the link, I'm going to open a new browser and then paste this link in so that you see how this appears. So this is the link that I copied. I'm going to paste it in here. Okay, so this is how it opens up. Now you notice that I can access this even without signing in. Okay, the way this is structured, if the changes are made here, it would sync directly to the folder I'm going to query on my desktop. So once the file is shared, all the departments need to do is to access the link and then put in their various numbers. Now we'll go and query the folder from our desktop, and then we'll test how this works when we make changes. So we'll leave this on standby for now. So we are back to our folder. So here, this is the folder I'm going to query. I'm going to right click this and then copy this as path. I'm going to use this in my Power Query. So I'll come and then open a new Excel workbook. Go to data, get data, and then from file, I am querying this from my folder. So this is going to query from my desktop folder. I'll click on this and then I'll paste the path that I just created, or you could also directly go and then pick the folder, right? So I'll open this folder, right? So this is what I get, a preview of all the workbooks. Remember, at this point, you would have shared everything. So this is what I have. Now I'm going to transform data. So this is the preview of all the files in there. This point is important because it allows you to look at the various extensions, right? At least we are sure that it's consistently SLSX, which is the Excel workbook. So once we are okay with that, we can go ahead and then click on this to combine the files. So I'll click on this. Okay, so this is how it's going to combine the file. It's going to first take a sample file, which is usually the first file, and then create a transformation from there. In the workbooks, we have a sheet consistently named sheet 1. So we can use this sheet 1 as the sample file, okay? But if you don't have that, then it's advisable to use the entire folder. So I'm clicking on this folder. Okay, so now the files have been combined, and then I have a preview over here. These are the columns including some attributes. So the main column that we are interested in is the data column. We also have the source name. Okay, in some cases you may want to add this, but the various departments are already in there, so we don't really need to bring this column along. So I'll select this column, right click, and remove all other columns. Okay, so this is now my 7 tables. I'll expand this, uncheck use original column name as prefix, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so this is where I see all my 7 inputs. So assuming that they filled in and they've made their numbers available, this will show you a preview of the inputs from all the 7 departments. So what we're going to basically do is transform Power Query, and then we'll go and change some of the numbers online to see whether it will reflect here. So for starters, I need to promote my first row as headers. So I will use first row as headers and then take away all the other department headers. So I'll come in here and then on check department, click OK. So this is going to give me my department, my account code, which should be a number. I'm going to use this to sort later. Account name is text, and then I have the dates going on from the 3rd column all the way to the end. The normal structure for this is that instead of the dates going across the columns, we need to unpivot so that we have all the dates in one column. So to do that, I'm going to select the first 3 columns, department, account code, and account name. Right click and unpivot the other columns, which are the dates. So I will unpivot the other columns. So now all the dates come in as an attribute. So this we are going to format as a proper date. So I'll name this date, and then I'll format this as a date as well, right? So this now has all our dates. So we now have the department, account code, account name, and the amount. Okay, so we now have the amount over here. I'll format this as a decimal. Okay, so this is going to be a fact table because this has all the records for the amount. And then from here, we are going to draw the dimension tables that we need to break down calculations with. So we need a slicer for department, one for account, one for calendar. And then we also need to be able to know what type of amount we have here, whether it's an inflow or an outflow. For that, we can quickly do a conditional column so that for the negative numbers, we have expense, and then for the positive, we have income. So let's do that quickly. I'll go to add column and then create a conditional column from here. So we are going to name this one type. Now, if the amount less than, so the formula is going to be if the amount is less than 0, then we want to mark this as an expense. Okay, otherwise we'll mark this as an income. Okay, so this is going to be our conditional column. I'm going to click OK. So we now have something for a type column that would show us the income and expense lines. Okay, so this is going to be text. You ensure that you always format this properly. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is going to be a fact table. We can rename it to make it easier. So let's call it budget. And then from here, we can now draw our dimension tables. So I'll right click, reference this. And here I'm interested in getting the unique departments. So I'll select only departments, right click and remove other columns. Then from here, I'll right click and remove duplicates. This now leaves me with a unique department. I'm going to name this departments. Okay, so after getting departments, I'll go back to budgets. The next step is to get the account code and the account name. Okay, so this can be in one table because they look up each other. So from the reference table, I'll right click and then reference this as well. So when this comes in, I'm interested in account code and account name. I'll right click this and remove the other columns. So I'll come highlight these two and then remove duplicates. So this gives me the account code and the account name. We use this to sort the account names properly. So this, we can name accounts. So we now have departments, accounts. Let's go back here and then reference for the type, which we are going to use as a slicer. So I'll reference this again, and then we'll come here. Now this time around, we are looking for whether it's an income or expense. So I'll remove all the other columns, come here and then remove duplicates. And this I'm going to name type. So all these three are going to be used as slicers, as dimension tables, and then this will remain our fact table. So now that we have this, let's create the calendar table, which is going to be used for time intelligence, calculations, or filtering. So for a calendar table, we basically need to create a series of dates starting from the first day of budgeting all the way to the last day, ideally 1st January to 31st December 2025. Okay, so to do that, we are going to use a custom M code that is going to stamp the first dates in here, add daily dates all the way to the end of the year. So to do that, I can come to Home, come to New Source, Other Sources, and then start a blank query from here. So the code we are going to use for this is number.from, open brackets, so list.min to grab the minimum dates from our budget table. So I'll bring in the name of my budget table. So this is budget. Then the column is the date column. Okay, so once I have this, I'll close my bracket for list.min and then number.from, right? So this will stamp essentially 1st January 2025. I'm going to copy this, Control C, bring in 2 dots for the date series, and then paste this on the other side. So this is going to grab the maximum dates. So instead of list.min, we are going to use list.max, right? Now, you'll notice that for our maximum budget date from our dates is 1st December, right? So we need to adjust this when we have our dates. But for now, let's see what this gives us. So right after the equal sign, you come in and then bring in curly brackets, okay? And then you press enter. So this is the list of dates, okay? So if we convert this to a table and we format this as regular dates, I have a series from 1st January all the way to 1st December. So if you look at this, it gives us all the way to 1st December. But if our actuals come in, we need something to 31st December. That can easily be fixed. So in the source table, we can come in here and then add plus 30, right? So you could do this or you could directly put in the date value for 31st December 2025, right? So once we do this, we now get 365 items. Now, the reason we create a calendar table is to be able to draw all the date attributes we need in our final dashboard. So I'm going to name this date, and then from here, I'll come to add column and then add the date attributes I will need. So I'll come to month and then put in the month values, which will be used for sorting. Then I'll come to date again, come to date under add column, and then under month, I'm going to put in name of month, right? So this gives me January to December. I can abbreviate or truncate this text. I'll come to transform and then extract the first 3 characters. Okay, so this will complete my calendar table. Because the 1 year budget, we don't really need a year. So I'll keep it at this and then name this the calendar table. Right, so basically what we've done is that we've queried the folder, we've established our fact table. These are the dimension tables we are going to use to break down our calculations. We normally use these as slices. It helps when they sit as different tables. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go in, create our first pivot table, and then make some changes online and see whether it will reflect in our final calculation. So once we've done this, I'll come to Home, come to Close and Load to. Okay, we are saving this as a connection, and then we'll load all this to the data model. I'm going to click OK. Okay, so we now have all our tables loaded here. Our budget, department, accounts, type, and calendar are here. And it's also loaded to the data model. So before we create our pivot table, we need to go through Power Pivot. If you have activated Power Pivot, it should sit here as a tab. If you don't have this, to activate it, you come to Data, and then in the Data Tools group, you can click on this data model. So it'll open up Power Pivot. Once you close the Power Pivot window, you should now see this tab here, right? So this is how we are going to navigate to Power Pivot. So I'll come here, we'll go to Manage, and then here we'll find our diagram view. Okay, so these are our tables. the budget fact table is here. We'll place it here, and then we'll now bring in our dimension tables. So these are dimension tables. Okay. Now, to connect them, we'll connect each dimension table to the fact table using the primary column. So the primary key here is department, going into the foreign key department in budget. For accounts, we'll do it at account code level. And then for type, we'll connect it to no income or expense. And then our dates will be connected here. Okay, so this completes our data model. We'll be back here to create and test our measures. So now that we've created this, let's test our first pivot table. Okay, so we'll exit and then create a pivot table, okay, in this existing worksheet. So I'm going to click OK. Right. So basically what we want to analyze is the total amount, the net position, which I can find under the budget. So I'll drop this in the value section, and we want to break this down by department. So I'll come to department and then drag this into this. So let's assume that this is all the dashboard that we needed to do. I'm basically trying to test that if, let's say, a department makes changes in their workbook online, are we going to get any changes here? So to test that, we'll leave this pivot table on standby. So we are currently at 79 million for our net position. I'm going to go back online to this OneDrive live. Okay. So based on what we've done so far, we want to test whether any change here online would affect it. So for starters, I'm going to make changes to the salaries. So all I need to do is I'm going to take off the minus sign, okay, here, and then press enter. Okay, so once I do that, on refresh, we expect this to feed our folder. So I'm going to refresh this, right? So you notice that an update goes into the Excel app, right? And even without signing in, we expect to get this change. Okay, so let's come to our pivot table. We are currently at 79. The change we did was on the account. We made changes to the salary. So we expect a change here and a change there. So I'll come to data, refresh, and refresh all. Right. So almost in real time, you will notice that this has updated. So we now have an increase because of the change that we did, okay, by the figure that we made positive. So this is the heart of the presentation, that even when the users are not signed in, okay, as long as they have access to this, they can query it live. Okay, any change that they make here, right, once it syncs to your desktop folder on your OneDrive, right, so here I'm restoring the minus sign. Okay, so once I do that, it saves automatically, but it helps to refresh. Okay, so the request is sent to Excel Apps Online, and then once I come back to my pivot table, I'll come in here. We were at 79, come to data, and then I'll refresh all. Right, so it retrieves it almost in real time, and then it restores what we had. So knowing this, we are now going to use this system to now create the final dashboard that will be responsive to any change that the departments are going to make. Okay, so now that we have our pivot table, we will now proceed to use the pivot tables to stage our final dashboard. So we have the income as a card, expense as a card. We have net profit or net position also as a card. Then here we have a spark line, right? So we've modified the spark line to be able to use the different colors to show the income and then the expense and the net position. Then we bring in our accounts, then break it down by month, going from January to December, which will give us our net position. Then finally, we'll bring in our slices and connect them to the pivot tables. So that is how we are going to approach this. So we are going to take advantage of this first pivot table and then use it to stage the accounts and the monthly breakdown over here. So to do that, I'll stand in the pivot table, come to pivot table, analyze, activate my field list. So I'm going to take off department. We'll use this as a slicer instead. And instead go to all. This is where you see all the tables. So over here, we can break down by accounts. So I'll come to the accounts table and then push account name to rows. So this gives me the breakdown of the sum of amounts and the account. Then on the column side, I'll break it down by month. So I'll come to the calendar and then push month name to the column side. Okay, so let me just adjust this so that we can see everything nicely. Okay, so there are two things that we need to fix, obviously. First, the arrangement or sorting of the month numbers. And then also we need our sales figure on top, which is our revenue, followed by the expense lines. Thankfully, we've made provision for how to sort these two fields. For our month names, we'll use the month values column that we created using the calendar table. And then for our account names, we'll sort them using the account codes. This can be done in Power Pivot. So we'll go back to Power Pivot. So I'll come here to Power Pivot and then I'll click on Manage. Right, so while we are here, we can now identify the tables that we want to sort. So the first one is the table for accounts. This is where the account code and account name columns are. So I'll select the account name and then come to sort by column and then choose sort by. So I want to sort account name by account code. So usually in the chart of accounts structure, the sorting is down by account groupings, right? So it's likely you have the income lines as lower numbers followed by expense lines. So that is the kind of system that we have here. So I'll click OK. So once this is done, I'll repeat the same for calendar. So I'll come to calendar, then month name. I'll sort this by the month values. Okay, so the 1 to 12 for January to December. So when you do this, anytime you draw these fields in your pivot tables, it will rearrange them correctly. So let's see the effect of this. So now you have the sales on top and then you have January going on to December. We want to be able to break this down using slices. So if you look at our final dashboard, we can slice this by department and then by type as well. So let's draw these two slices. We stand in the pivot table, go to insert, and then we'll click on slicer. Right, we have all our tables here. Ensure that you are selecting them from the dimension tables. So just to be sure, you can check you are in the all tab. This is where you see all the labels. So we are here for type and then for department. So I'm going to click OK for these two slices. Okay, so later we'll take these to the final dashboard, but we can do a little format on this by breaking the type into two columns. Okay, so if I do that, I can nicely fit it on top here. Let me bring in some rows. Then for department, we'll do same. I'll bring this here, slicer, and then push this to 7 columns representing each department. So it's usually useful to stage your dashboard in a sheet normally called calculations. Then when you are done, you just transport everything into the design. Right. So let's be sure this is working. If I select account, I see the account numbers. Right. These were the numbers that we changed online. Okay. Sales and marketing gives me that. Now, for what we want to do, we don't want the pivot table to be changing or updating when a slicer is clicked. We want it to maintain the same list of accounts and the same list of month names, right? We can easily fix this. We need that because in our final staging, we want the row side and the column side fixed so that we can just reference the numbers in directly without doing a lookup. So we can do that by right clicking. We go to pivot table options, right? here we will uncheck auto fit column width on updates, right? So this ensures that the structure remains the same in terms of the row height and then column width. Then when we come to display, activate show items with no data on rows and columns, right? So this way, if we miss any data for months or account numbers, it still shows up. Okay, so these are the two changes that we are going to do with our pivot table. So now if I click on account, the structure remains the same. If I click on sales, the structure remains the same, right? So this is what we are going to use. Now we need to calculate 3 key measures, right? These measures are going to be used for the cost that you see here: income, expense, and net. Okay, so to do that, let me just create 4 measures. Okay, so these are very simple DAX calculations. We basically want to sum our amount, okay, for income. So, and then we do for expense, and then we do for net. To do that, we can do it in Power Pivot. Okay, so we go to Power Pivot, go to measures, and then we set up a new measure. So we will choose to keep all the measures in the budget table, which is our fact table. In some cases, you can create a separate table for all your measures as well, right? So first one is going to be income. Okay, so we'll come in here and then put in our income measure. Because we have a column for type that tells us whether the record is an income or expense, we can use a calculate function, okay, to filter the sum that we are going to do if the type is equal to income. So we'll use calculate, and then the expression is a sum of the budget fact table amount. So we'll close this. This is the expression that we are going to filter, bring a comma, and then say that if the budget type is equal to income. Remember, that's why we drew the income and expense type. So this is going to bring the inflows in our budget. Okay, so you can check your formula just to be sure everything is right. Set the format here. Use a 1000 separator to 2 decimal place, and then we click OK. To make it easier, I'm going to copy this for expense because we just have to change the filter, right? So I'll click OK. So this now gives me the income calculation. I'll repeat for expense. So I'll come to a new measure, come here and then call this expense. So back in here, I'll just paste this and then change this to expense. Right, so as we did, we set this as 2 decimal place, check the formula, and then we have income and expense. Then lastly, we'll take our net position. So for our net position, it's going to be, now you notice that as we calculate, because I'm standing in the pivot table, is coming in directly here. Okay, so we can take this off and then restore our original design. Later, we are going to use cube functions to just draw these measures. Okay, so I'm going to stand in here, do our last calculation, come to measures, new measure, and then here I'm going to calculate this as net, right? Because I have 2 measures already, I can just call the income in here, and then taking note of the sign of our expense. Okay, I'm going to put this here as a plus, right? Because the expense side is going to be negative. Okay, so I'll do the same formatting for this. Check formula to be sure everything is fine, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so at this point, for each of the measures you've done, you can bring them in using pivot tables, which would be too much of real estate to use. So that is why sometimes we use cube formulas to draw these measures that we have calculated. So let's bring in the value for income, the value for expense, and then the value for the net position as direct formulas. So we can use the cube value function. Okay, so it returns that measure from the data model or the cube. So I'll come in here. The connection is the data model. Start that with a double quote, close the double quote, bring a comma, bring another double quote to bring the different sides of your data model. So we have our measures here, right? So I'll tap this, bring in a dot to show the different measures that we have created. So you see expense, income, and net. right? This one is the implicit measure that was created by the earlier pivot table. So we can ignore that, right? So here we just bring in our income and then we close our bracket, right? So when I close the final bracket, I get the total income. One thing that you can do with cube functions is that you can use the filters to update this value that you have created here, right? So this slicer is called type, this is called department. So I'm going to modify my formula, right? After the comma, you introduce the slicer with SL. All of them have the prefix XL. So slicer department, slicer type. Okay, so this is going to make sure that our filters updates all our calculations as well. So if I come here, you realize this is for the entire company, right? Because sales and marketing is a profit center. If I click here, you realize they have the income, but project doesn't bring us any revenue. Okay, so it's able to filter based on your selection, right? I'm going to just copy this down, Control D, okay, and then just change this to expense for the measure, right? So this is for our expense, and then for our net, I'm going to just change this one to net, and then we finally have this, right? Of course, if you put these two together, you realize that you end up with this same calculation, right? So cube functions allow us to directly bring in our formulas. So now that we have our measures, it appears we've catered for everything in our dashboard. Let's now set up this sparkline that has been used for the outlook. Okay, so that is going to be another pivot table. We can insert it directly from the data model. Okay, so we bring it in here. So we are going to take the net calculation that we did. Okay, so we'll put it in the value section, and then we'll break this down using the calendar. So we'll push the month name into the row section, right? It comes already sorted because that's what we wanted, right? So just as we did for the earlier pivot table, we'll right click this, go to pivot table options, and for the layout, we'll uncheck auto fit column width on updates. So after taking off the auto fit column width on updates, in the display, we'll ask you to show items with no data on rows and columns. Okay, now this is important because we want all the 12 months to show, right? When we use the spark lines, we need to show the placeholders for all the 12 months. We don't want it to shrink when a slicer is used, right? So while we are here, I can just reference these values, okay, which are going to sit outside the pivot table as a mirror. So this is what we are going to use to feed our sparkline. Okay, so this now completes the staging for our dashboard. So this way, if I come in and I select any of the slicers, right, you notice that it still stays the same for the 12 months, which will make it easier for us to bring it into our dashboard. Okay, so now that we've done this, we've completed all the inputs for our final dashboard. Let's start the design for our dashboard. Okay, so we are almost there. This is the layout for our dashboard. So we have some border lines to bring in the account names, and then we'd also break down the net value numbers by month using the same border lines. These are regular shapes. Now we've used colors to show you the income, the expense, and the net position. And then we'll stage our sparkline in this area, right? So let's quickly bring in the numbers. These have been staged already. So I'll first bring in the accounts standing in here. I'll put in an equal to, go to sheet 1, right? Now for this case study, the layout is just the same as what we have. So by selecting this and pressing enter, I get a dynamic spell, leaving the last row for my total calculation, right? Now, because we staged the pivot table to match this exact output, I can also bring in the monthly values. So I'll do an equal to here, then highlight the whole of this range from January to December, and then press enter. So this will bring in the values for the sales and the expenses. these have already been formatted in accounting format, right? So I can now calculate my net position. So I'm going to just stand in here, highlight the whole of this up to December, Alt equal to now bring in my net position. Okay. Now let's feed our shapes with the calculations that we've done. So these have been formatted already. I'll select the shape, stand in the formula bar, put in an equal to, and then come and then pick our income calculation here. I'll press enter. Now, while we are here, we can format this in such a way that we get rid of the detailed 1000 format and then end up with something like this. Okay. So to do that, we can highlight the range, press Ctrl 1, and then come to custom. In the type, we'll come and then put in the custom for the format that we want, which is 0.00. This is 2 decimal place. I'll bring a comma to knock off the 1000 part, and then another comma to knock off the million part. Okay, so 0.002 commas, and then I'll put in an M, okay, for this purpose. So this is going to be 105.30 M. So based on this, the earlier calculation that we had should have been an M, right? So the M is for 6 zeros, and then the K is for 1000. In our case, this is 105 million. So now that we formatted it this way, it means this should appear here, and then we come here, middle align, and then center align, and then we can increase the font size to about 32. Okay, then we can bold in it, right? So if you like, you can set the font to white for contrast. Repeat the same for expense. Now for expense, before we bring expense in, it will be good to show the absolute number, right? So because this is a formula, I can just come in and negate this. So we get 26.30. So this way I can come, stand in the formula, and then just directly reference this. Okay, press enter. So just as we did we'll center this middle, we'll format this appropriately, and then put in 32 for that, and then bold it. Okay, make this white as well. And then finally, for our net position, we'll stand in here, bring in our equal to, and then directly reference this. Okay, so over here we'll do the same thing. I could have applied a format painter, but the colors are different, so I would have to do this directly. So 32, then we bold in this, make this white as well to be consistent. Okay, so now that we have this, we can now bring in our outlook for the year. Now the trick we used here is, instead of using regular column charts, we used sparklines, right? Sometimes it's a bit more responsive, and then you also get to use different colors. Okay, so let's do that quickly. First, I stand in a single cell, right? And then go to insert, and these are the types of sparklines. We are going to use the column 1. So I'll select the column, and then the destination range is already selected. That is a cell I started from. My data range, this is where I made provision for the values in the pivot table, right? The way I designed this is always going to show 12 values for each of the months. Okay, so I have this, and I'll click OK. So once I do this, you will notice that it's just stuck in just the top left cell. Now I'll highlight this over the range that I've made provision for my chart, and then once it's highlighted, I'll come and then merge. Okay, so once I do this, it comes like a regular chart. So that's the trick that we used. Now here you need to now map it to the 12 months in the year. Okay, so you can do this with a text box, just make sure that it's aligned properly. So this has been done already over here. So I'm going to copy this, Control C, and then paste this here. Okay, so you just have to align this nicely. Hopefully, if you don't change any of the columns, this should align nicely to each of the bars. Okay, so now this has been aligned, Now let's go in there. What we want to do is to set, these are net income numbers. So we want to set the sparkline color to match this one. So we'll first come in and then show high point. Okay. And then we also show low point, right? So, and then we also make room for negative numbers, because when we choose expenses, it's going to turn the numbers around, right? So we'll highlight these three. Then we come to the sparkline. Here, the color we are choosing is this shade of blue, okay? So this would match the net income over here. Then we come to the marker colors. So for our high point, we want it to show green for the positive numbers, okay? And then for our low points, we want it to show this red, okay? So that is how this is going to be done. So once this is done, we also need to set the negative points, okay, to this red color as well. Once the slicers come in, you see the effect, okay? So this completes our sparkline. Now let's bring in our slicers. So we'll bring in our slicers. They are here. Normally when you have cube formulas and you move your slicers, in this case we are cutting, right? Temporarily it goes into an error, right? So we just have to come here and then paste this, paste everything, okay? So once we paste it, it comes back as it should. So we have these two slicers. We can spread it all the way, right? Thankfully, the slicer colors match our theme, so we don't really have to do a lot of work here. We can just go and probably increase the height a bit to just make room for this, okay? So this is going, so we have something like that. So now, if we click on accounts, you notice that it's responding as it should, okay? So these ones that are cost centers, okay, are not showing anything for the income side, right? If I bounce to sales and marketing, realize that my income, expense, and net numbers also come in, right? For our income and expense slicers, okay? So when I click on the income, I see only the income, but we need to fix situations where there are errors, okay? So let's revert and then let's come here. That in the event this results in an error, you can wrap an if error around this, okay, for it to show blank. Same with this one, an if error around this for it to show blank. And then finally, we'll do same for this one as well, an if error around this for it to show blank, right? So this should now fix situations where we have blanks, okay? Now, another thing that we need to take care of is to ensure that our slicers are filtering everything here. You notice that if I click on the department, it's not really filtering the second pivot table, which is the outlook for the net income. So we can fix that. Right click on the slicer, go to report connections. It's only reporting to pivot table 2, the first one. We can connect it here and then click OK. Do same for this one. Connect this one also here, right? So now for the cost centers, right, we expect to see only the outflows, okay, when we come in here. And then for the revenue or profit centers, the sparkline just inverts like that, right? So this concludes our final dashboard. We've covered a lot, but the heart of this presentation was to show you that even if you query a folder sitting in your desktop, share the content online to users to input in values, you can use this to create this interactive dashboard such that when inputs come in from the OneDrive source on refresh, the indicators in your dashboard are going to update. I hope you learned some lessons and some tips that you can use to improve your dashboard design and data analytics in Excel. Thank you so much for joining this session, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. Have a good one.